Good morning. Welcome to Watershed. We're glad that you're here, and happy Father's Day. I want to welcome you into space this morning, and we've got people here live in the room. We do not have people outside today because I don't know if it's still raining, but it was raining pretty hard when I came in today. A little hydroplaning on 74 is always a great way to start the morning. And then we got people who are joining us via Facebook and YouTube, so we want to welcome you. We are glad that you are here, even not present in the room. We want to welcome you in this space this morning, and we want to take just a second to take a few deep breaths and set some intentions for today. We're going to be singing about love in a few different manners this morning. Love maybe from a parent to a child, the love that we experience from one another, and love from God. And so we're going to kind of walk through it a little bit. But before we continue, we want to just take a deep breath. We're kind of in the midst of transitioning to summer and all the different things that means. Places are opening back up. People are able to gather together again. And that means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Some people are really excited. Some people are nervous and anxious. And this morning, however you are coming in, however you're showing up, we want you to be able to be yourself and bring all of that in the room. So take just a moment and maybe center yourself and give yourself permission to be here. You to stand this morning. We're going to sing this together, that God's love won't ever stop chasing us or pursuing us. And that's the kind of love that we want to model as we start together again. You won't stop, never stop chasing. My heart won't stop, ever proclaim no containing. Your love won't stop. Your love won't stop. Oh, you won't stop. Never stop chasing. My heart won't stop. Ever proclaim. the Bible, there's many places that talks about God being love. There's lots of places that talk about God loving people, but there's places where it says that God is love. And so for many of us, we grew up maybe in a space where God was associated with a father figure. And in some places, maybe that's helpful. It's helpful to give a way to understand God. And in others, it is wildly unhelpful. For some who have fathers who did not love them unconditionally, who pained them, who hurt them, this notion that God as Father is not helpful. And so this morning, in whatever way you show up, again, we want to give you space to maybe ponder and think about and feel what it would be like if God was just love, not tied to a specific person, but that God is fully love. How would that change our view of God? How would that allow for more openness in our view of who God is? So we're going to sing a new song. Tyler's going to lead us, and I want to welcome you to and invite you to sing with us as you listen.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest nights. You were close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything, yeah. Your goodness is running after me. All my life every breath that I am able, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything, yeah. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Y'all can have a seat. It's always fun following Tyler. I will not be singing, so that helps a little bit. My name is David, one of the pastors here on staff. I just want to welcome you once again to Watershed this morning. Thank you for braving this much-needed weather. And even though I claim no responsibility for it, the weather, do apologize that we're not able to have our outdoor experience. So thanks to those of you who normally would be sitting outside for accommodating us in this way by either tuning in online or by joining us indoors. Just a couple things I want to make you all aware of. Actually, first off, you all probably, some of you probably saw the shirt Tyler's wearing, an acknowledgement of Juneteenth yesterday. If this is, or this year was perhaps maybe the first time that you were aware of Juneteenth, or you're kind of in a season of education, learning about the history of what this day represents or doesn't represent, then shameless plug, selfish, totally shameless. I would encourage you to follow my good friend Tommy Allgood on social media. Not only is their social media a wealth of information, they are also very connected with many other people who I think offer just really, really crucial insight when it comes to the collective liberation that still eludes us. So if you are having trouble finding Tommy on social media, I'd be happy to help you out. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of lead with that. Additionally, kind of more Watershed-centric, we have something coming up called Preface 2.0. It's going to be launching next month. It's actually not the first time we've done something called Preface 2.0, but we're reimagining it or relaunching it for the first time in years. And what it is, if you are someone who has recently gone through Preface, or perhaps you're someone who's been at Watershed for a really long time, but maybe tuned out for all of the obvious and justifiable reasons during the pandemic and just the difficulty of kind of staying plugged in during that season, then Preface 2.0 is kind of a next step. For those who are new to Watershed, it's a next step to just kind of continue the conversations that you started in Preface, learning a little bit more about who we are as a community, but also having the opportunity to explore who you are and your own journey of kind of faith, spirituality, liberation, things like that. But maybe you've been here for a long time, and maybe you went through Preface years ago, like I said. I would like to think that you are still changing, growing, learning, evolving. And the reason I would like to think that is because as a community, we are still changing, growing, learning, evolving. And so if perhaps you've been disconnected for a season from Watershed, then we would love to get you up to speed on the ways that we have changed and continue to learn and evolve. And we'd love to hear about your journey as well. So what I'm trying to say here is it's not just limited to those of you who have maybe been part of the last couple of prefaces. Maybe you've been at Watershed for a really long time and would love to just have a clear picture of who we are as a community and who we continue to become. In that case, Preface 2.0 is for you. It's going to be fully digital on Zoom, so don't have to worry about childcare or anything like that, and it's also totally free. So you can sign up via our website, via a link for those of you who are online. A link should be in the kind of in the message, the post, on Facebook or YouTube. And our lovely, totally free, epically curated Watershed app also has a sign-up link, and so we would encourage you to do that. Speaking of the app, also on the app this morning is a tab that says volunteers. And we are kind of in this in-between space right now at Watershed where, you're living it, you're seeing it right now, where we're back, but we're still kind of in this liminal space. Varying degrees of comfort as to what it looks like to meet in person. Weather permitting, we're still doing outside. Online isn't going away. And we're kind of trying to just show up authentically in that space. And so there are areas of Watershed that, of course, require volunteers, and we're kind of trying to just navigate, recruiting people, but also honoring people's boundaries as far as what they're comfortable with as it relates to, safety concerns around the pandemic and all of that. I think you get it. Point is, though, as we continue to hopefully, cautiously continue to kind of put this season of pandemic in the rearview mirror, we need you. We need your help. And so if you go onto the app, you're going to see two categories of volunteer opportunities. You're going to see kind of one-offs. You're going to see immediate needs where we just need a couple people one time to do kind of a short-term little job for us. A lot of it relates to kind of just getting this building back up to speed when it comes to being a place where we can gather and meet together. But then there's a few ongoing things. Of course, we always need help in our greenhouse area with our children. I'm always looking for volunteers to hang out with youth, which maybe sounds intimidating, but it's pretty epic. I'm a little biased, I'm the youth pastor, but you should check that out. And then our hospitality team. You probably noticed Chuck and Tracy this morning, and you probably didn't notice their smiling faces because they were wearing masks, but we need people who maybe are really good at smiling with their eyes. Who can just welcome people, answer questions, direct people, and things like that. So all of these are low bar. We train you, we bribe you with, or at least Blair bribes you with snacks and stuff in the morning. But Watershed wouldn't be possible without all of your help. And so if you're thinking that maybe this is something that you might like to explore, not just do, not commit to, but explore, smash that button on the app, check it out, and let's have a conversation. Fill it out, and someone will reach out to you. But like I said, volunteers is one way that we're able to do what we do here at Watershed, and then, of course, the other way, or one of the other crucial ways, is just through the ongoing generosity and ownership of this community. And so we couldn't be more grateful at the generosity that we experienced in the last year with all of the uncertainty, all of the challenges brought about by the pandemic. We are able to be here a year later together because of that continued generosity through your material resources, through your finances. And so, of course, we try to make that as easy as possible. We have the app. We have our website. I won't forget this morning, Tracy, we have our boxes in the back for those of you who are kind of interested in old school paper checks. And we also have other various options, like certain organizations will match donations, because we are a registered 501c3 nonprofit, and so there's opportunities on that front as well. But if you have any questions, I do encourage you to check out the giving section of the Watershed website, where we kind of lay out how all of those funds are stewarded, hopefully in your eyes, in our eyes, responsibly, allowing us to continue to do what we do. So once again, we are so glad that you are here joining us this morning, whether it's in person or digitally. For good or bad, you're going to see me again in a few minutes, but for the time being, I'm going to turn you back over to our wonderful band.
Morning. Oh, I can't see anybody. Pulled up the wrong thing. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Hi, I'm Austin. This is my fiance, Catherine. I'm a 2. I'm a 4. I'm a Virgo.
And I'm a Capricorn.
I'm definitely a firstborn.
And I'm definitely a secondborn.
I'm the oldest of 4.
And I'm the youngest of 2. We literally couldn't be more opposite, but it was obvious from the beginning that a spiritual foundation, good community, was high priority on both of our lists. And we found that in Watershed since day 1.
I was raised in a Southern Baptist church, attended a Christian school for a brief time, and both of us went to some pretty huge Christian universities. Though both of us came out after and later in life, it's no shock that these foundational environments weren't the most welcoming. It definitely shaped our timeline of coming out. After coming out and having my entire church community stripped from me, I found myself feeling hurt and unloved from those that promised to love me as Jesus did, regardless of my sexuality.
When I met Austin in 2019, both of us hadn't attended church in many years, and we found ourselves seeking a welcoming spiritual community. The first Sunday we walked in the hallway, past all the classrooms and greenhouse, I imagined one day dropping off our kids to play in those very classrooms. As time passed, I grew to see our future and our lives growing together at Watershed. When the time came and I was ready to propose, I couldn't imagine a more perfect place to ask her to be my wife than where our future really began.
A few months before COVID hit, we got a really, really wild hair and showed up to Mark and Ollie's house, knowing absolutely no one, for our first Kindred event. We had never even spoken to a Kindred member, even though we'd heard them speak 1,000 times in service. And prior to that Tuesday night, we literally had no idea what we were walking into. But at this point, we haven't really stopped speaking since. So sorry you didn't know what you were signing up for. But Mark was sitting at brunch a few weeks ago and asked us what was saving us right now in this season, and more importantly, as it relates to Pride Month this year. And for a moment, that was literally the easiest question I've ever answered. You guys, Watershed is saving me. The friends turned family you have given Catherine and I, the ability to serve in Greenhouse with my future wife, knowing that I thought I'd never be accepted in a church at all, being gay, literally not able to serve. The ability to walk in these doors every week, and my family dynamic never looked as anything different than anyone else's. We've done a lot of reflection throughout the last 15 months on what we've clung tight to during this pandemic, and Watershed was at the very top of the list every single time. So thank you. Thank you for showing up, fighting for what matters most, always loving us, each of us, exactly as we are.
This theme of love keeps showing up this morning, and in light of today being Father's Day, we're gonna do a song, and there's family that you're born into, and then there's family like who Austin and Catherine just mentioned that you choose. The people that love you unconditionally, that love you and let you show up and encourage you to show up exactly as you are. I think we long for that type of love from what would be our born into family. And some have it, some don't. And so we show up here with all of that. And we're going to sing this morning. We're going to continue to sing about this unconditional love that is not only available to each one of us to receive, but also to give. Each one of us is capable of looking around the room, looking in our communities, looking each other in the eye, and unconditionally loving one another. So again, thank you so much for being here. I hope this next few moments will give you some space to let that wash over you a little bit.
Stayed there forever. There's something
things the heart just knows. I've been begging the seconds, the minutes, always asking them to take their time. Wanna make some memories before you leave while you're still mine. And when it's time, whichever way the wind in your wings blows, whichever way the dream in your heart goes, whatever you do, remember that I love you. When the world around you keeps changing, feel like you can't keep your heart from breaking, whatever you do, remember that I love you. I love you. Oh.
I want to show you the life worth living, keep you from mistakes that I made, tell you all about Jesus and the love that is new every day. Always.
Whichever way the wind in your wings blows, whichever way the dream in your heart goes, whatever you do, remember that I love you. When the world around you changing, feel like you can't keep your heart from breaking, whatever you do, remember that I love you. Can't you just keep falling, falling, don't know which way to go. You come out of the road just walking, they lead back home. Whichever way the wind in your wings blow, whichever way the dream in your heart goes, whatever you do, remember that I love you. When the world around you keeps changing, feel like you can't keep your heart from breaking, whatever you do, remember that I love you. I love you. That I love you. Remember that I love you.
As promised, I'm back. And there was a nice little bumper this time to kind of separate me from them, which give me a little bit of space to not feel like I'm directly following them. So you probably heard, in passing maybe, when Austin and Catherine were up here sharing, you probably heard them make reference to numbers. Like I think I heard Austin say, I'm a 2. And maybe you're like, I wonder what they're talking about. That was the Enneagram. And if you spend any amount of time at Watershed, you'll hear us talk about the Enneagram, make reference to the Enneagram. It's kind of like a second language for us at times, sometimes nauseatingly so. In fact, it got to the point at one point a few years ago where, and this is normal for me, I don't normally kind of observe, it's just a personal thing, I don't normally kind of observe with any great fervor the historical church calendar, but I gave up the Enneagram for Lent. I was, because you laugh, but I felt like literally every conversation, people would be like, well, as a 9, And then they would go on to, talk about their complete aversion to any form of conflict. Or like as a 3, and then you would get this like esoteric, like completely like, 3s are tough to explain because they're like, they're all about like success and ambition, and so they can kind of chameleon themselves into anyone. So I'll pick an easier number. Okay, as a 2, and then they'll show up like kind of like a obsessive puppy, like how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? And not to like spread hate, like not hate, but shade, like unfairly over all the other numbers. As a 5, I'm constantly showing up feeling like I have gotten kind of like this massive like imposter syndrome when it comes to like my competency, and so I'm constantly trying to give people like resources, like like I'm useful because I know things, and read this blog or listen to this podcast. Anyway, the whole thing was exhausting. So I gave it up for 40 days, and afterwards I was like, I don't know if I need to pick that up again, but I did, and the thing that redeemed or reclaimed the Enneagram for me was kind of having this epiphany, and it relates to the bias that we're talking about today, because just maybe if this is your first week showing up, and I think this is week 3 of this series, Pineapple Pizza, but we are looking at different kind of cognitive biases, different biases that we show up with that maybe impact our ability to relate to one another amicably. And so what I realized with the Enneagram is that I think what it kind of is, it's a bias detector, and not just any bias, but particularly the bias that I'm going to be focusing on today, which is the comfort bias. And we'll throw that up on the screen while I'm kind of talking about this: the comfort, complacency, or convenience bias. And where the Enneagram shows up in this is I'll continue to use Enneagram 5s as an example. I am constantly looking for the comfort I feel when I have a sense that I'm competent, when I have a sense that I know how to be or know how to show up, or I have something to offer that makes me needed and useful in the scenario, I will not just run to it, I will sprint to it, and I will cling to it with all kinds of desperation. And when I can't have that kind of comfort as it relates to competency, I will maybe react violently, not like physically, but like defensively, or in sort of like you go into like a fight or flight sort of mentality. And so it's this comfort bias that I want to spend our time on this morning. And another kind of adjacent one. This isn't the focus, but you'll probably hear. It'll be obvious how this other one fits in, but we'll throw it up there too. It's like this conservative liberal bias. I'm going to try to not make like direct reference to the political system in the United States, but there's some, just kind of inevitability on that front. But really, it's this comfort bias, this first one, that I want to be focused on. And here's how I kind of want to lay it out. So, we, as a collective humanity, we have a natural aversion, an allergy, perhaps, to what I'm going to kind of broadly call contradiction. We like things to fit. We like puzzles, where everything fits kind of really nicely, and, afterwards all the pieces are in their right spot, everything is ordered correctly, and then we take a step back and we're like, oh, look at the beautiful picture of wholeness and completeness. And we sort of order our whole lives around this obsession with non-contradiction. We want things to be at one with themselves and with each other. You might remember, for those of you who've been kind of paying close attention to our last series, the one where we kind of walked through the hero's journey, kind of mythos or archetype, is kind of the goal of the hero's journey was atonement. And maybe if you've been around the church or Christianity for any amount of time, you've heard that word atonement. It's this idea of being at one with yourself, with the world, with God, with the universe, this idea of at one-ment. We crave it. And what the Enneagram does is it sort of gives us a shorthand to what we think or suspect or believe or even are certain of is going to bring us that sort of at one-ment, that wholeness, that completion, that non-contradiction that we seek. And human beings, us, all of us together, we're sneaky. We're sneaky in the way that we approach this because this idea that I'm laying out, it sort of transcends that conservative liberal binary that I was kind of gesturing to a moment ago. So let me unpack that. Let me lay that out. So if you are someone for whom your kind of natural values in the world, make you want to conserve things, then your natural inclination on this front might be to look back. You might imagine that sometime in the past, maybe you have a clear picture of it in your mind, maybe it's more vague or esoteric, but somewhere back there, you had that wholeness, you had that non-contradiction, you had that oneness that I'm talking about. And if you or we could just get back there, everything would be okay again. This stress, this trauma, this alienation that I feel that I'm experiencing, if we could just get back there, then everything will be good. And sometimes for people in this camp, the way that we see ourselves getting back there is, all right, things have gotten out of order. So maybe the wrong people are in the wrong places or doing the wrong things, and if we can kind of just order everything more appropriately, then we'll be able to get back to the wholeness that we crave. So perhaps this takes on an air of exclusion, or even not even so much exclusion as, just everything in its proper place. So if those people would hang out with their people and could go to their place in kind of the order or hierarchy of things, then everything would be good again, and so those people might be women. So if the women would, kind of just go back to where the women are supposed to be, then everything would be good. Or it might be a racialized other, immigrants. Or even just people who like a different sports team. The logic kind of follows. If everything just kind of gets back into the place that it's supposed to be, its place of origin, perhaps, then things will be good. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you might have people who look at that and they're like, that's awful. We need to, we need to liberate everyone. And so in order to do that, if it's sort of going back and exclusion over here, then over here it might be, it's a future. Language you might hear around this other camp is, being on the right side of history, or, there's a quote misattributed to Dr. King about like the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And the idea here is like, if we can just like get everyone around the table, make the table bigger, make the tent bigger, lots of mealtime metaphors, circus metaphors, things like that. Everything's going to be good, and and so we're just going to include. But then inevitably, what happens is there's an obstacle to the inclusion. So just like with the first group, they're like we just get back and get everyone in the right place. Oh, but then there's an obstacle. There's this person or this group or this ideology or whatever that's standing in the way, and so we need to eliminate it or forcibly, legislate around it or whatever. And then this group, like, okay, we're going to include everyone, but then there's always one, at least one, that's kind of standing in the way of that. And that takes many forms. It can be an individual again. It can be a group. But we just need to get rid of them. And then once we get rid of them, then everyone left will be included and it'll be good. So you can probably map this fairly cleanly in your heads as you're listening to me onto maybe yourself, maybe your uncle, maybe people in your life, or your coworkers. Like I don't want to be reductive here, but more or less, if this is a continuum or a spectrum, you can probably locate yourselves. And maybe you're sitting here and you're like, ooh, I like this because, I know people over here and I know people over here, but me, balance, right here in the middle, everything in moderation. And no, I'm not giving you a pass either. So for group one, the thing that is comfortable, the thing that helps us imagine that we can eliminate contradiction in our lives is going back. It's nostalgic. We can just get back to the way things were. Everything ordered in its proper place will be good. New group, it's utopian. It's if we can just kind of get over the hump and get the right people in, which is most of everyone, and just get a few of the wrong people out, then we'll be good. And and then you got your armchair centrist in the middle who are kind of like, you're both wrong. We just need balance. It is only I who can rise above the fray and have my sage wisdom of everything together, synergy, blah blah blah. my guess is, and again, these aren't necessarily going to be clean categories, but my guess is you can probably map yourself and map just about everyone in your life, or at least everyone in your life who has Facebook, onto this continuum that I've laid out for you. And maybe, probably, you're even feeling a little bit of disruption, a little bit of discomfort as you kind of think through how this maps onto kind of your broader social sphere. Because it's all about comfort, and actually even more so than it's all about comfort, it's about the fantasy of wholeness. And even more so than the fantasy of wholeness, the thing that makes that wholeness seem so irresistible, so necessary, so much, so important that really the ends consistently justify the means for us to achieve it, is our need to create an obstacle. Here's what I mean by that. We don't have the wholeness. We feel that deeply, viscerally, in our psyches, in our bodies. And so there must be an explanation as to why we don't have the wholeness. And so we create narratives. We create ideologies. We create scapegoats. We create a group or an individual for whom, who's standing in our way. So for one group, it might be immigrants. For another group, it might be the racialized other, white supremacy more broadly. And here's the thing. Sometimes there really is something. There really is a system. There really is a group. There really is a person. There really is any number of these things that actually are standing in the way of genuine kind of collective material liberation. But what I want you all to see is that the way that these things become supercharged and disruptive for us isn't simply that it's there, but it's this interplay between this wholeness that we're fantasizing about and the way that we're able to identify someone or something standing in our way. And there's actually a sense, psychically, humanly, wherein we're energized by that. We even enjoy, in some sense, the fact that there is an obstacle here to overcome with whom we can contrast or sort of differentiate ourselves from. So it's kind of a mess. And I think probably, if I could venture to guess, that most people in this room have felt the collateral damage of this directly, interpersonally, familially, in your friendships and things like that. If not over the course of many years, at the very least in this last year, as we've navigated the challenges of the pandemic, the ongoing obstacles towards collective liberation, towards specific liberation for the Black community, for the brown community, for those among us. This month, it's Pride Month. Yesterday was Juneteenth. I mean, there are these kind of cultural acknowledgments to how far we still have to go that cause us to look around and look for the villain, look for the obstacle, and taking, on some level, great pleasure in contrasting ourselves or overcoming that obstacle. So, all that said, I kind of just laid out stuff that probably all of you know, either implicitly or explicitly, because you experience it on a day-to-day basis. So what do we do about it? Well, this is sort of kind of a church, and so drawing from at least the Christian scriptures is what I'm going to do this morning. There's a verse or collection of verses in the book of Galatians. A little background on Galatians. It's a letter to the Galatians, written by the Apostle Paul a long time ago. And more or less, this is an oversimplification, so forgive me, but more or less what Paul is wrestling with is kind of exactly this. You have different groups. They have different senses of what it looks like to kind of move forward together in community, or maybe questions of should they even move forward together? What does it look like for them to coexist? And most of Paul's text in this letter is him wrestling with those tensions, wrestling with the inherent contradictions that these competing factions within this church and kind of in the ancient world more broadly are trying to just kind of gain kind of posture and priority in order to achieve this kind of wholeness or fulfillment, or this thing that consistently continues to elude them. And that lack of wholeness, that experience of contradiction, it's traumatic. It's alienating. It makes us vulnerable. And so that's what Paul's navigating here. And he says this is about a little more than halfway through, and he's kind of built his argument up to this point. He says this. He says, "So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Pretty famous verse. Many of you have probably heard it. So what's Paul doing here? Because here's the thing. I think it's really easy to map, if you just read this verse in the abstract. If you haven't been following Paul's whole argument, and spoiler alert, I don't have time to walk you through the entire book this morning verse by verse, but if you haven't been following Paul's argument, if you're just kind of cherry picking this verse out, then it can absolutely serve the agenda of any of the groups that I've been talking about this morning. So you can look at this and you kind of say, hey, all right, so there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. So we're kind of getting rid of all of these really divisive identities. And if everyone could just kind of rally around, kind of being Christian, or maybe in our context, if everyone could just kind of just rally around being American, America first, if we can just kind of get back to that, then we wouldn't have all of this messiness, all of this contradiction, all of this division. Or you could look at it and be like, oh no, this is, we just need to get everyone on the table, and it's going to be good if we can just have unity and diversity and inclusivity. We'll just get all of that. Inevitably, you're going to run into the contradiction of wait, two of the categories are slave and free. That's not going to work. But there's still going to be this temptation to read it that way, kind of okay, we either need to get everything kind of in its proper place, which is kind of getting rid of these kind of identities, or maybe it's just including them all, and we'll try to make that work. Again, the natural temptation is going to be to read it as Paul's kind of instructions or exhortation towards this non-contradiction, this wholeness that, again, traumatically continues to elude us. But there's some clues in here, even if you haven't read the entire letter, the entire passage. There's some clues in here that I think can help us. First off, Paul's invocation of the word faith. What is faith? Memorized some verses in the book of Hebrews when I was little, kind of told me what faith was, but shorthand is faith on some level, it contrasts itself from a kind of certainty. And certainty is comfortable, isn't it? When we're certain about something, when we know exactly how things are or need to play out, then it gets really, really easy to justify our position. So if we are certain that if we can just get back to the way things were, then, then if I feel certain about that, then you kind of enter into this weird ends justifies the means space. Or if I'm certain that if we can just move forward, kind of get over the hump of these things that are standing in our way, then we'll finally have that wholeness, and I know it for sure. So again, whatever we got to do, whatever it takes. Or if we're kind of in that sage kind of balance space, then all right, if I can just everyone to see that they're wrong and that it's actually kind of this I'm right, kind of in the middle sort of thing, then we'll be good. But faith is different. Faith is vulnerable. There's even a trauma to it. It's freeing. It's freeing because we're sort of freeing ourselves to kind of venture out into the unknown, fly blind a little bit. There's this vulnerability to it, but that's also, that vulnerability in of itself is scary, and so we often recoil or retreat from faith towards certainty, towards comfort, and therein emerges the bias. What else is in this passage? Paul talks about baptism. Probably don't see a lot of that here. But baptism, at least at the time, would have been kind of this sacrament of symbolic death. So we have faith, so that's kind of death to certainty. We have baptism, that's sort of death to a certain way of being in the world. So once again, we're kind of just sticking with trauma and vulnerability. So going out in faith, going out in uncertainty, being baptized, dying to an old way of being in the world symbolically, and rising again to this new posture, to this new way of showing up. And what is that new way of showing up? Well, Paul talks about this idea of being in Christ, clothing yourselves with Christ. And I think for many of us who grew up in the church, it's really easy to kind of look at that and kind of think we know what it means. And so we have these kind of lily white pictures of Jesus that, he's showing up with his like perfectly wavy hair, and he's bringing wholeness. He's bringing atonement, and and finally everything's going to be okay, and healing and stuff like that. But at least in Galatians, but also in all of the other letters that Paul wrote, so not just in Galatians, in fact, but really in pretty much the whole New Testament, this idea of Christ and being in Christ is scandalously tied to the cross. At other places, Paul talks about, I desire to know nothing but Christ and him crucified. He tells people that you've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer you who live, or it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. We can't extricate this vision of God as revealed in Jesus from the scandal, from the trauma, from the contradiction of the cross. So just to be super clear here, I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that any one of these three positions should be privileged or the way we should go, but crucially, and this is maybe the most important thing, because I think there could be a temptation, you hear me kind of dump on all three of them and be like, oh, okay, well, then what do we do? Like, it kind of feels like there's an opportunity here to just kind of uphold the status quo. And that's certainly not what we want to do, because quite frankly, the status quo is really bad. And Juneteenth, for example, if Juneteenth is anything can be anything towards us, it needs to at least be a reminder of how far we still need to go. And so I don't want the takeaway to this conversation this morning to be just kind of throw up our hands and kind of say it's hopeless. But what I do hope we can see, and what I do hope we can wrap our minds around, and this is hard, is that maybe what we're looking for isn't this non-contradiction, isn't this at-one-ment, isn't this wholeness that I suspect and want to suggest to you this morning is actually the driver for all of the ways that we hurt ourselves and one another. So here's how this would look. There is an inherent contradiction to reality, to us, maybe even to God and God's self. Again, if we're learning anything true about God in Christ, then God has revealed God's self on the cross. God has revealed God's self in scandalously, unexpectedly, in the murdered body of this person who exists at the margins of society. And on some level, we're asked to reconcile, which is another way of saying make whole again, this vision of God that we have as this kind of whole thing that's going to bring us together and create all of this non-contradiction. So what would it look like, just kind of as a thought experiment at first, what would it look like if we kind of said, no, maybe what's being revealed about us, being revealed about God, being revealed about the world and the universe around us is that on some level this idea of not at oneness is inherent. Maybe on some level there is a mere trauma to being human. And maybe a lot of what we think of as sin, a lot of the ways that we order our world and our lives in ways that are marginalizing and exploitive and dehumanizing are born maybe with good intentions, but born in our attempts to overcome that sort of inherent hole or lack that we feel in our being. Let me say it another way because this is complex, but I want to make sure you all follow me. So there's a trauma at the heart of reality, and in our attempt to overcome that, we inflict a lot of unnecessary trauma on ourselves and on one another. Because we see this imagined utopia, or this imagined Eden in the future or in the past, or maybe this imagined heaven, in perfect balance and harmony in the here and now, and we need it. And so to pursue it, we have to overcome whatever or whoever stands in our way. Maybe you can see how racism maps to that. We've been promised something as people racialized as white. And that promises the American dream, that if we just try hard enough, that if we just, take out the right amount of debt so that we can go to college and get the right job, then everything will be okay. And if we just do it, it's not happening. And so we need some explanation. We need some reason why it's not working. And so we we imagine an obstacle keeping us from this imagined future of wholeness and security. And so it must be their fault. We need someone to dump, or something standing in the way to dump all of our anxiety, all of our trauma on. So we create narratives like race, where, and race then goes in, it retroactively justifies the hate that we feel, the frustration, the angst that we feel, and so I think you're tracking, and you can follow this same logic with really any form of marginalization and exploitation. But the problem, again, the thing that motivates this, the thing that causes this to well up in us, is this belief that if we can just get there, if we can just get that, if we can just arrive here in the past or in the future or in the present, then we'll be good. But what if that's not true? What if our pursuit of wholeness feels a lot like when you buy a new car and you drive it off the lot and it immediately becomes significantly less valuable? What if there's something about the journey? What if there's something about the solidarity that we can experience together in our mutual and collective vulnerability, in the very trauma of being a finite human being? What if meaning could be found in that? And we free ourselves from this relentless pursuit of happiness? Could we perhaps then be free to not imagine these obstacles standing in our way, these racialized others, these gendered others, these, fill in the blank, of whatever you think is keeping you from the wholeness that you long for and that you perhaps deserve? And so the language that I kind of want to play with around this as we wrap up is this idea of instead of trying to order everything so that everything's in the right place, or finding perfect balance between these positions, or kind of just including everyone except for that one group, and trying to overcome and create wholeness this way, what if there's a sense in which we can experience a kind of collective non-belonging, where if you don't belong and I don't belong and really none of us belong, then all of us together, there's an inherent egalitarianism. There's an inherent equity in our collective vulnerability, our collective trauma. And then once we're sort of free to do that, and it'll be scary, we'd have to do it together, but once we're free to do that, then we can take a sober-minded look at the material inequality, the material inequity that exists in our world, and we can say, okay, we're all kind of in this together traumatically, but here's a group over here who, in our attempts to create a sense of wholeness and utopian heaven, that they've kind of gotten the short end of the stick, so maybe there's an opportunity for something reparative. I'm choosing that word on purpose. Something reparative in the way that we can kind of continue to heal this divide within us. If the thing that brings us together is collective trauma, collective alienation, collective vulnerability, then maybe we really do have an opportunity to stop inflicting additional, unnecessary trauma and alienation on one another. One last thing, kind of a parable or a story that I heard from a friend that I think kind of illustrates how this could look like in the church. Because again, kind of, sort of, that's what Watershed is. So imagine you have 3 sheep herders, or shepherds, if you will. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, but they enter into a competition. And the competition is who in, let's just arbitrarily pick a number, who in 6 hours can create the biggest and best sheep pen to keep the sheep safe from the outside world. So the first shepherd comes up, and they do a good job. They make kind of a state-of-the-art sheep pen that fits 50 sheep. Awesome. But the next person comes up, and they're able to actually make a sheep pen in 6 hours that fits 100 sheep. So the judges come to the first person. They're like, oh, well, 50, that's very impressive. Good job. Then they come to the next person like, oh, 100 sheep. 100 sheep could fit in here. 100 sheep could be safe and secure and comfortable and whole. Awesome, even better. Then they come to the third person, and here's what the third person did for 6 hours. The third person sat around, procrastinated, maybe went to the pub or the coffee shop with their friends, spent some time on social media. I don't know. They did what you do. And then with like 30 minutes left, they're like, oh, shoot. And they grabbed 4 pieces of plywood, and they built like a little box around themselves. So the judges show up, and they're like, What is this? You barely fit in there. You couldn't even fit a single sheep in there. And the shepherd says, no, you've got it all wrong. You're in the sheep pen. I'm the one standing outside of it. And here's what's being communicated here. We go through life thinking that this world is traumatic, and it is. And maybe we're going to show up at church on Sunday, and maybe just there we're going to find this respite. We're going to find this escape from all of the traumas of the world, and we're going to have just this glimpse or this glimmer of wholeness, and then we're going to hopefully go back. And it's like a spiritual shower that cleans us off to kind of go back into the world and do all that again. But what if we have it exactly wrong? Or what if we just reimagine it? What if we flip it on its head? So instead, we, I think rightly, see that pretty much everything we do in the world, all of the ways that we order ourselves individually and collectively, is all about disavowing, covering over, running from this trauma that's honestly just part of reality. It's at the core of our being. We'll call it original sin. And what if church could be this place where we could come in together in solidarity with one another, face that collective vulnerability, face that alienation? What if we ordered our time together, our communal practices, our liturgies, and our rituals around making peace with that, making reparation for the ways that our attempts to overcome it have been traumatic or harmful and unnecessary ways to one another and to our world? And then that changes us, and then we go back out into the world where, quite frankly, us and everyone else are still trying to overcome the inherent trauma of existence, and us being changed then can collectively and individually spill out over into our systems and our politics and our organizing and the ways that we show up. So what if church then is not an escape from the trauma of existence, but a making peace with it, again, crucially, together in our collective vulnerability? And then we go out, changed, scarred, but in a kind of weird way, free, and together, in solidarity with one another, slowly but surely, we can struggle together for real change. Not just hypothetical change, and crucially, not some change that we are convinced is ever going to bring us to this utopian or Edenic place of wholeness, but change where we can begin to live with one another, live for one another, being able to see the mere humanity of the vulnerability that we all share with and for one another. That's the weird idea I had for you this morning. That's kind of it. So once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing to show up in a place like Watershed, where we continue to try to figure out what does it mean to live with and for one another. I pray that you go out and have a blessed week. Grace and peace to all of you. Take care.